last year's decision to ban not only fertilizer, we didn't get weedicides and fungicides. So all those three things are essential for commercial perennial agriculture. So this year we reckon we lose about 25% crop compared to last year, which was not a great year.
Innovation and sustainability in a century-and-a-half-old industry. That's the topic, and in the studio with us is Roshan Rajadurai, who is the Chief Executive of the Hayleys Plantations sector. Welcome, and it's good to have you here. Roshan, you've been part of the industry for close to 30% of its century-and-a-half-year-old existence. That's a fantastic perspective you to bring to the table in the first place, right? You're currently with Hayleys Plantation Industries, and you are a big player in tea and rubber. Hayleys is a big player in tea and rubber. Let's talk about the current. Let's talk about the context around which now we are all faced with, which is Sri Lanka's economic crisis and the events that led to it. How is the recovery out of this looking right now?
Thank you, Shamanti. Yes, as you said, I've been involved in the industry for almost 40 years. Just to put the industry in the context, I think everyone in Ceylon or Sri Lanka, as we call it, knows about tea.
Sure.
But a lot of people don't understand the current dynamics. Now the tea industry of Sri Lanka is mostly smallholder driven. They produce about 75% of our green leaf production, cultivating about 70% of the land. So no longer the times that big estates or big companies grow the tea industry. The weight has shifted to the smallholder, and in the smallholder sector there are about 450,000 operators, as we call, in the harvesting, whereas in the big companies we have about 125,000 people, although we host and we look after over 1 million people. So what I'm trying to say is that the dynamics of the tea industry has now moved towards a smallholder. And in this context, if you put the dependence in the smallholder sector and the plantation population, over 10% of our national population is directly dependent on this tea industry alone, apart from the other plantation crops like rubber and coconut and cinnamon. So during this 1.5 years or 2 years, we were the only industry, I can claim, that we maintained our business continuity without a break, except for the fact that 3 days we were forced to follow the government instructions about curfew. But on the 4th day, we picked ourselves up, and ever since then we have been managing the industry, both smallholder sector and the corporate sector, without a hitch, overcoming many challenges. Like one of the important things is the inability to have the physical auctions. Immediately the tea industry came up with the e-platform for auctions. 150-year-old auction system was transformed to e-auctioning system. So these are things that a lot of people don't capture when you talk of a century-and-a-half-old traditional, how shall I say, earthbound, because ours is truly a green crop tea. Wherever you see it's green industry. So that's the perspective that I like to bring to this table.
One of the immediate challenges, but potentially that you are dealing with and have been dealing with for now several years, is the restriction or ban on agrochemicals.
Yes.
Which affected agriculture throughout.
Yes.
And you suggested to me just before we started that the impact on productivity or output is about 25 to 30%.
30% yield, yes.
How is the industry now strategizing around, how do you craft a strategy around that?
Let me take you back a couple of years. In 2015, unfortunately, we had a precursor to this ban. At that time, government went and banned glyphosate, the most safest, most commonly used weedicides. As a consequence of that ban, up to around that time, we produced about 340 million kilos was our national production. As much as we impressed upon the government at that time, for many logical, very unscientific, populist reasons, they banned it. And lo and behold, year and probably year hence, our Of course, there are other factors, but mainly driven by the inability to control the weeds, which has impact on harvesting. You lose about 10 or 20% of the crop. More so because this is a labor-intensive industry where labor has to physically go and harvest, and there are weeds, there are leeches, so it has a vicious cycle. Then they don't come for work. Outputs, all that impacted on Sri Lanka, reducing the national output to about 300 million kilos.
From about 340.
340 million kilos. So that really put a sort of damper to the progress that we have been making so far. And thereafter, again, last year's decision to ban not only fertilizer, we didn't get weedicides and fungicides. So all those three things are essential for commercial perennial agriculture. So this year we reckon we lose about 25% crop compared to last year, which was not a great year.
So you'll be at about 325 million kilos?
No way. Last year we
So it's 225 million kilos.
2 years around that.
Right.
Right. So it's because of the rains, there may be a little ups or downs, but we are definitely lower near last year's crop even.
So that would be a record low crop for like 30
Yeah,
years?
it's one of the lowest. The tragedy is that this is a good year that we get good prices. Had we continued our usual plantation related operations, our country would have been able to get at least 325 million kilos into so many dollars. That is additional income which is in our hands, which we need not have lost unnecessarily.
So you, on the one hand, have the impact, or you've been facing or dealing with the impact of the agrochemicals ban for now some while. It's now being reversed. So lower crop. The flip side of that is all this has led to a rapid depreciation of the currency. So the rupee income of planters or the industry would have increased quite a bit. How is it on balance, looking on a sort of income statement, on a balance sheet? How is this impact looking?
Actually, because of the depreciation in terms of rupees, I would say we are doing well comparatively. But it's very misleading because within this are hidden the seeds for future trouble, because we were not able to fertilize.
Sure.
Fertilizer cost is about 10 to 15% of our total cost of production.
Right.
Say if your 100 rupees is the cost, about 15. So 3 or 4 times a year we need to fertilize to keep the tea in a vegetative state because of leaf that we harvest. So in the absence of fertilizer, it will not happen over time because we have been fertilizing for centuries, probably a century. So gradually we can see a decline, not in the quality of the production itself, but the quality of Ceylon tea. There are very, very important elements in the fertilizer that promote or that maintain the chemical characteristics of the tea leaf. So you lose that, then you lose the quality and the uniqueness of Ceylon tea. And already our competitors, a very well planned, very well coordinated strategy to say that Ceylon tea is on its last legs. They will not be able to supply the quantities and the qualities that they did earlier. And they are directly approaching our buyers and some large countries close to us and capturing the markets that we once had.
So it's both a quantity reduction and potentially a quality reduction, which you think may lead to lower auction prices.
Long-term market loss.
Okay.
Right? Because once, like any product, once a customer gets used to a new product, it's very difficult for the supplier to change and the customer to change.
Right. Sure. So without being alarmist, right? Do you anticipate there will be a reduction in auction prices due to this over the next few years, or you think this is a thing that the industry can learn to navigate and address?
As you said at the outset, ours is a 150-year-old industry. So we in the plantation sector are very resourceful. We have been researchant at times like this. We have had worse times. So we are confident that although we had these issues, I would call it these challenges, that we have the capacity to overcome this man-made problems, man-made crises and come out. Because I believe through these crises, while it's a crisis, it's an opportunity for us to innovate, think of different ways to do the business. For an example, now when the fertilizer was banned, basically, we immediately got on to different modes and methods of applying the limited fertilizer, which is at a very high cost. If I give a comparison, earlier the fertilizer, the cost of production, say if it was, for example, 20 rupees per kilo of made tea, today is 25 times as much. So it has inflated by 25 times. So what we do now is to have a different method of application, placement method. Like we take a alawangu hole and insert the 21 or 25 grams of fertilizer. So we have also innovated because it is a necessity to survive these times. And in the absence of weedicides, we have something called the buyback of weeds. Earlier we used to remove weeds and throw it away. So now we pay the workers to remove weeds. So people who are doing nothing, they go and remove weeds. We weigh, we pay it, and we convert that into compost.
Right.
And in our plantation companies, we are given soil augers. So we drill a hole in the soil, and this decomposed fertilizer and bulk manure, we bury it and cover it up. So we would not have done it at the scale and the speed that we are doing it. So this kind of inability or unavailability of fertilizer chemicals has prompted us to adopt new technology.
One of the challenges, besides the ones with the agrochemicals brand and potential fallout with buyers, which you are trying to address, right? The industry is also highly human resource intensive. I think that accounts for maybe 70% of
70% of our cost is direct labor cost.
Sure. And it's no secret, I think the people have been moving out of plantation work.
Of course, out migration from the job is a irreversible factor, because if you look at the repetitive manual work that you have to do in tea or any other agriculture. Tea is not unique in that sense. If you look at agriculture per se, people are migrating from the agriculture because the farmers educate the children. They are looking for a better world. Their aspirations are different. So this is not a phenomena that is confined to tea or to Sri Lanka. This is all over the world. So in that context, we have come out with innovative business models in terms of traditionally, in Sri Lanka, we follow the 150 attendance-based wage model.
Sure.
It would have been good at a particular time when the plant had absolute and monopolistic control over their terms of employment, meaning that the worker had to depend on the management, the language and other restrictions were there. Probably if I go back to my younger days as an assistant manager, people hardly got out of the estate because of the language issue, ethnic issue, identity card issue, the problems. Sure. So they were confined and obviously they were engaged in estate work. But today, you get into a bus from Nuwara or in Colombo in 4-5 hours. Our economy has opened on so many fronts and there's a huge demand for labor. So people are coming down to Colombo and there is a perceived, I qualify saying that perceived dignity, because plantation people have been made to think that their job is not valuable, but we are taking a lot of efforts to inculcate in them that this is a very valuable job, that they are the top of the pops because we produce the best in the world and they are the ones who harvest that. So there are the challenges that we face. Out-migration is one.
So how does a sector or your company, one of the biggest players, begin to address this issue, this challenge? There's the perception. Then there is also, your headcounts have been headcounts have been dropping drastically. Definitely. Tea continues to be a huge export earner for Sri Lanka, so it's not something we could turn. As the national economy cannot turn its head away from this.
Absolutely, there is no debate about the fact that there's a serious out-migration of workers. Like, for example, when you privatize in 1992, we had 327,000 workers working. But today, our population has increased, the resident population from about 8 lakhs to 1 million over 30 years. But our workforce has in fact declined to 115,000. So one might wonder how we have sustained the industry in the absence of 2/3 of our workforce.
2/3 of your workforce have gone away in the last 30 years.
They are living and enjoying all the facilities. So they are working in nearby towns and bazaars and Colombo. So we have come out with innovative business strategies, like the revenue share model is one which I would like to explain. So what we do is, as I told you, because of the dignity issue, people don't like to be identified as daily paid workers. So what we do is we assign, because the land belongs to the government, companies are on a long-term lease. We assign, like what we do normally. Even now we assign rows in a tea field. Once you assign a row to a worker, day in and or every week when that person plucks that field, he or she comes to that row and plucks it. Like in a rubber field, we assign a block for 24 years. He or she taps that block till the rubber tree is uprooted. So we assign areas that we cannot possibly manage with the registered workers, as we say, and we say flexi working times. You don't have to report to anybody, you are not supervised, you go and work on your own, and you give us output and we pay them on an agreed rate.
Okay.
So this is what we have been promoting ever since 2013. This is a model that the smallholders are adopting, and that's why they are very dynamic. Within a space of 30 years, they have tripled their extent. So that is a manifestation of the success of this kind of entrepreneurial, self-managed work. Unfortunately, I don't know for whatever reason, the unions and other stakeholders didn't see the merit of it. While as most of the companies now, 30 to 40% of our crop comes in this model, the revenue share model.
This you're referring to RPCs or the Hayleys clusters?
RPCs, and as well as Hayleys. We of course gave the lead. I started this when I was in Kahawata Plantations, when I was CEO there, because we had a serious problem about labour shortage in the Ratnapura district. So we introduced this, and thanks to the efforts of the managers on the ground, it was a success. So when I moved over from Dilma Kahawata, I brought it into Hayleys plantation sector as well.
So it is a model, you say, that's applied to about 30% of your workforce.
30 to 40% of our RPC or the corporate crop comes this way. Of course, 100% of the smallholder.
If you give me a little bit more context, Roshan, if you go back and think, what was the RPC crop back in 30 years ago, and what is it today? Because your labor force has come down by 2/3. What happened to the crop?
Actually, that is what I am trying to highlight. Now, RPCs had about 90 million kilos of crop 30 years back.
Sure.
Today, we are about 70 million, 71, depending on the vagaries. That is because one is the out migration of workers.
Sure.
In tea planting or in any agriculture crop, particularly in tea, the yield is a function of the number of workers plucking a certain number of kilos into how many times you pluck the same field.
Sure.
Now, in the past, when you had adequate workers, you used to pluck a field average 4 times. So
4 times a month.
4 picks. So
A month.
For example, if I just give a very simple analogy, it's like you take about 10 workers per hectare. If each worker plucks 20, so one round you pluck 200 kilos. For the month, you would get 800 kilos output from that field. But today, I do not have the workers to pluck 4 rounds. So I say, for example, I pluck 2 rounds. Maybe I use some little more labor, 12 laborers. Even if my average is 30, I can never match the total volume of crop. But individually, the person's average may go up. It is of no use to us because the leaf is of inferior quality. So to overcome that kind of a shortfall in the requirement of labor, we introduced this. So our crop has come down by about 10 or 20 million kilos, nowhere in proportion to the drop in the labor. That is because the gaps are, of course, more efficient and better management, motivation, training, upskilling. Apart from that, the different model.
So that is also a huge productivity gain
Yes,
in a period of 30 years. Otherwise, the industry would not be where it is.
Seen his last days.
Sure.
Had we just sat back and grumbled or did nothing about it, so we were proactive. Of course, against much opposition from stakeholders, if I say, because they didn't want that age-old established system to be changed.
When you say stakeholder opposition, are you referring to unions, to workers, to plantation owners? Where was the opposition the greatest? How did you overcome that?
Basically, the unions, probably because it was something new. I believe the unions would have thought that we are trying to sort of grab the leverage that they once had with the workers, because when the workers are independent, when they start self-managed work, that their reliance and the dependence on the unions will be less. But that's a misconception. We have very good relationship with the unions and there is no problem. Now I think they have come round. I've heard union leadership with the unions, political leadership is talking about, of course, the terminology, nomenclature may be not accurate because they don't know the industry, but basically are talking of the concept of self-managed work, the revenue share model. Some say ownership and making them owners, but I believe it's a nomenclature issue, not the intention. Intention is for the workers not to do this 8 to 5 job and then pluck the minimum merely to qualify without penalty or being punished for not bringing. That system won't work, definitely not. And we have proven beyond any reasonable doubt that, and lot of research, TRI, academia, universities have done research on these different names. It's basically revenue share model, and they have proven beyond any doubt that their income can double, their quality of life and their mental well-being. Like they feel we are not daily paid workers, we are also part like a smallholder, we are also like block managers. So we have done those innovations in the blocks that we manage. We have put their picture and said block manager. You have a estate manager, you have division manager, it's a block manager. So we have tried these strategies to lift them up to feel that they are no longer workers, like manual workers. You are also somewhat responsible, who can think and act for yourself and chart their future.
When you've been part of an industry for so long, your career in tea is more than a quarter of the tea industry's history in Sri Lanka. So obviously you're very closely linked to the industry. But if you had to be dispassionate about its future, how do you think that this is the model forward?
I am fully convinced this is a model that will bring winners all round, because the workers, because of their low level of education, because most of the people do not have access to quality education. It's not that they are not unwilling to learn. Because of that factor, their education levels are somewhat marginally lower than the rest of the country, and they don't have any other skills, and there are no large industries that can absorb such a huge workforce. And they are living, their housing, their relations, their sort of legacies tied to estate. So to a certain degree, like there is a lot of pressure for them to remain where they are. And their family unit, surely they can't come to Colombo or Kurunegala or Kandy and buy a house. So there are physical realities. So in that context, I think having a sustainable, vigorous, profitable tea industry will benefit them, because they will find a livelihood. And I think in going forward, we must make the tea industry very vigorous and very profitable, so that there is an attraction, a pull factor for them to remain. So this is the way that we can keep the tea industry going. Look at the smallholder sector. Smallholders on average have about 60 purchases of land, but they keep on succeeding because they are very dynamic. The people are paid on output. So we have estates in the low country. We have seen that from small blocks, they pluck 20, 30 kilos. And when we put our RPC, or the corporate sector workers, on that model, I have seen that by 12 o'clock, they pluck 30 kilos. So it's a mindset, because when they work from 8 to 5, they think they are working for someone else. When they pluck on their own block, they think everything that I get is for me. So it's a mindset change. So we are having a lot of training programs, educating them on the value of being on estate, because you would have heard this phrase, from womb to the tomb, we care for them, with so much of other benefits, profit shares, paid holidays of 20 days. So it's a good, at their level, it's a good employment, good livelihood source. So we have to develop it and consolidate that.
If the RPCs were formed and listed about 30 years ago, I think, right? I think you RPCs have 50-year-old, 50-year-old, 55-year-old leases. So there is, there's through more than half the lease periods. Again, if you, what is more important? Do you think the structure of how we've done RPCs and companies is important to preserve, or do you think the industry as a whole can move to a smallholder-like model in the future?
Well, it was a necessity at that time. If you go back in history, why did the government have to privatize? Because at the point of privatization in 1992, the state managed plantations were incurring a loss of 5 billion rupees. Treasury was basically subsidizing. On top of that, we had a 1.5 billion loss. So if we equate to today, it's about 40 billion rupees subsidy from the treasury, which would have been impossible.
It's impossible to
so
pay.
While not trying to compare, you can see the performance of the state management and private management in the two sectors. So it is important in going forward that we maintain the structure, because in India, a classic story, because large corporates are not finding tea industry viable and they are shedding estates, and when that happens, individuals will take over. But for Ceylon tea, the uniqueness of Ceylon tea is we are recognized for our sustainability initiatives, human care, and all those things that come in a package. So if it sort of de-aggregates then we do not have that kind of a leverage, that kind of force to be a record within the world markets. Because in a large corporate, for example, now Hayleys, we have very well qualified expert sustainability teams, HR teams. So that kind of cohesiveness is not there when you deaggregate.
So you think there has to be some level of corporate
Consolidation, yes,
corporate involvement
yes,
in the future
yes,
of the
yes.
tea industry.
Yes.
Although that, though right now that corporate involvement of tea accounts for maybe 25% of the crop.
25% of the crop, you're right.
Roshan, this has been a wonderful conversation. If there's one or two more last things I want to sort of ask you is talk to us about sustainability. The agriculture industry, and tea in particular in Sri Lanka, is at the front line of the ravages we are seeing around climate and the unpredictability, the propensity for large changes of weather patterns in very quick time. What do you think, if you step back now and you're looking 10, 20 years into the future, what do you think will be the impacts on tea? How does an industry even start preparing for this?
Right. I think I can answer that very well, because our industry would not have lasted for 150 years, being a very intensely cultivated vegetative crop. It's not like coconut that you go and pick 6 times.
Sure.
We pick it every week. Had we not followed sustainability initiatives or methods, all these years we would not be where we are today. Of course, it is now very popular and catchy to use this word sustainability, but we did the same things that we are doing 30, 40 years ago. Soil conservation, water conservation, nutrient recapture. You say now most of the plantations are in the central hills, our catchment areas. Even those days, we can remember we were forbidden to scrape. We planted the river banks with bamboo. All the initiatives and good practices that are recommended now have been done over the years. Of course, now it is very scientific, very well organized, and is very much focused. So I think plantations, to their credit, over the years from the time of colonial management, had far more commitment to preserving the geographical asset, because we know that if the soil and water is depleted, our business is gone. So we had more interest than any other party to preserve our ecology, the environment, and the physical asset or resources that we have under our custody in the estates. And you can see and read that reforestation, afforestation, soil conservation, even to currently now the lot in vogue is animal protection. Even the leopard protection companies have signed MOUs, and you would have seen in the TV that even when the leopard fell into the house, how well trained or educated the people were without harming. They captured the leopard and hand it over. So we have gone a long way. I think even all our rivers and streams, our whole riverine system of the country starts from the hill country. So we have taken adequate steps to reforest and protect the hill crest. Of course, this ban on agrochemicals like weedicides is a very, very, negative thing, because we are compelled, everybody will not follow the same practices, to do manual weeding, which is not advised, because you make the ground more prone to soil erosion. Chemical weeding is ideal without disturbing the soil. When you spray, it forms a mulch and all those benefits. So I think on that score, I think we can proudly claim some credit, the plantation sector, having done our part towards as a national and conscientious business.
I suppose the fact that you were organized as a corporate sector made these practices possible.
That's the point I'm trying to make, because it's centrally driven. And when you're in a corporate, everybody, whether they like it or not, has to conform to some sort of a set of rules and regulations. And in fact, Sri Lankan tea plantation, particularly the corporate sector, is the most certified sector in the whole world. Like 200 odd estates, we have about 700 certifications, like the Rainforest Alliance, Forest Stewardship Certificates, Ethical Tea Partnerships. To a certain level, I think we are over-certified. That is one of our unique selling points to the world, that we are very, very conscious and careful about our environment.
In conclusion, let's also talk about the changes we are seeing in climate. Tea, like most agricultural crops, particularly, I suppose, is very sensitive to climatic
Yes.
changes, right? You have grown used to a certain with method of working with the climate. You in the plantations, you watch the weather very carefully and adapt your practices, your management plan even to how you think the climate will work. But we face this challenge of drastic changes to the climate. I mean, this is you don't have a crystal ball, but how do you think the industry will sort of have to face this? What will happen?
I think we have taken stock of this not now, not in the last 5 or 10 years, probably about 15 years back, because we are all parts of large corporates like, say, for Hayleys or Echelon, John Kills. So they have their corporate strategies and we become part of it. And those large corporates have woken to the fact about 2 decades back, and we have started all the sustainable initiatives, as I mentioned. And most of the companies, if you look at the cost of width of the RPCs, they are aligned with some big names in Sri Lanka, and we are well on that journey. We are well past that. That's what I was giving you examples of, even say regenerative agriculture. Long before the government thought of it, of course, the fertilizer ban, it only accelerated the process. Now food cultivation. Now we all talking about the food security. Last year, in the midst of COVID, we encouraged, we facilitated, we promoted home gardening because of logistic problems. And we started the food drive. We in fact started giving fingerlings, and we reopened all the ponds that were in the estates and introduced that, because tilapia is very nutritious. We want to supplement the food. Like that, so many initiatives we started to get the thing going. Of course, by the time the government machinery woke up, we have already halfway on our journey.
So, Roshan, Rajadurai, that's wonderful insight on an industry that's a century and a half old. It's refreshing to see how nimble it has been, particularly in the last 30 years since professional managers stepped in and corporates stepped in to navigate the industry. Certainly not without challenges, but thank you for joining us and
My pleasure.
sharing your
Thank
thoughts.
you very much.